Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. Talk about for cars, rusty old cars right here. And if we all know too, is to where if we've seen the film, talk about Pixar cars right here, and you see right here is actually the details right here of example right here of a rusty old car right here. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way that besides race cars, it could also be tow trucks, and it could also be other sorts of other service vehicles also. But really, that during the film, no, it sure seems that way. That was there really any sorts of explanation whenever it comes to rusty old cars? Rusty old cars are just another way of stating as to where rusty old cars are not really considered race cars. They're just known as like like anybody say too that rusty old cars. A good example of a rusty old car would also be is like the type of car that can only go so far, can only do so much, and maybe can only see so much that they can see or something like that. But still, but talk about for rusty old cars right here, and so it sure seems that way that when we're talking about rusty old cars, are we necessarily thinking about rusty auto parts? Are we thinking about maybe rusty tires, or maybe just about how the car runs also? And so it's like in case if we're all want to know too, is to where that whenever it comes to understanding, I'm like, oh yeah, talk about for old cars. And so I know that I talk about the rear view mirrors right here, but it sure seems that way that there was a like in the film, no, that 102 is to where which mirror will be facing the east and which one will be facing the west right here. But I have right here, I talk about right here with rusty old cars, and it's like, yeah, people are likely thinking too is that when we think about rusty old cars, that are we necessarily thinking about that the car parts? Are we necessarily thinking about that? The car's ability to where how that they're able to drive and how they're able to race and all that. But people might even say too that that's also known as a classic. Classic old cars, and let's just say that most of the time it seems like it's all about cars that you have not seen in a long time, or if it's cars that you haven't, you haven't seen before. And so let's just say that if we're talking about cars, back in the 1960s, and maybe cars from back in the 70s, and 102s, that, that the type of cars that we refer to is that, the cars, the ones that still drive and still race and all, but a lot of times, talk about, if we're talking about, for Mater right here, but really, what does it usually mean when we refer to talk about for a rusty old car right here? Cars that could still race, but then also that known as for tow trucks and also known as for service vehicles or something like that. And a lot of times, I could think too is to where that when we speak about rusty old cars, so a type of car that known as that well, if you want to go ahead and teach me a trick about how to be able to get a good jump start, or something like that, or maybe about how to clear and clean the windshield or something like that. So a lot of ways it sure seems that way that when we speak about rusty old cars, though, that that's just another way of saying is toward it's the car still runs, but then on at the same time, it's like it's got a lot of scratches and dents inside of on the paint and all, but still. So I know that like watching the movie though that we talk about right there, that you've seen that they were talking about with Mater talking about is that having rear view mirrors on the side right there, and to where you will be able to see right behind you, and so it's like just thinking too is toward it when we're thinking about rusty old cars, and with those rusty old cars, it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to understanding about cars, and you're probably thinking too is that well, with rusty old cars that like I say is to where Lightning McQueen maybe thought too is toward it well, you're not a bulldozer, you're not a tow truck, you're not anything such as a particular tractor. You used to be able to haul, anything in particular, but talk about right here with the tow truck right here. So let's just say that with the film right there, talk about for rusty old cars right here. So let's just say in the back right there will be these tools. And so let's just say that if we were to say something like, use a word or phrase to where, rusty old tools. What is wrong with saying rusty old tools, especially? And a lot of times it sure seems that way that you're probably thinking too, is to where, rusty old tools. What do we necessarily mean when we say rusty old tools? Does that basically mean is to where those tools are no longer accessible to where that they can go ahead and do the job? Or does that pretty much mean that that they had to be licensed and manufactured just by the company or something like that? So a lot of times we're probably thinking too is to where that, rusty old tools. And with those rusty old tools, are they going to be made to do the job? Or if anything, like everybody else would probably say too, that now it's over the fact about with the type of tools that are going to put a smile on your face also. But it sure seems that way that, that the type of heavy, especially like the heavy duty jobs, especially. The tools that do the heavy duty jobs are known as like, rusty old tools that still work. They still work just fine. All you gotta do is just knowing about how to use them. So if we're talking about, rusty old tools right here, and like everybody else would probably say too, that, what is a good example of how to explain about rusty old tools, as to where you're trying to figure out, you're trying to figure out a good solution on how to fix the problem before, like, you come up with a solution that you go ahead and try a few tricks and all that. And just want to know too, does it look good this way, or does it look good that way? Does it look good right here, or does it look good over here? So talk about right here for rusty old cars or rusty old tools or something. But let's just say though that if we're talking about driving in the dirt or something like that, and everybody else would probably say too, driving in the dirt right here. And what I know too is to where, driving in the dirt, what does that pretty much mean right there? And that means is that to where that, you just really haven't got a good clear-eyed view at all. Like, for what the direction of where you're racing, what direction that the vehicle is driving and all. But still, you're talking about for driving in the dirt right here. And but it sure seems that way that when we're talking about rusty old cars, though, that all we necessarily thinking about is that that with the way that the car drives it, and also could also maybe be a buzz, is that that those cars are not really considered race cars. That those are cars that have a lot of dents and scratches in them, and also it's another way of how to refer to her that, like anybody say that, talking about rusty old cars here, that the type of rusty old car that we could maybe even be talking about is the one that has a broken, have broken headlights, or maybe have a few, a flat tire maybe on one side or something like that. So it sure seems that way that when we're talking about rusty old cars, that those rusty old cars could have a lot of defects and all, but still, talk about for rusty old cars, rusty old tires, and so it sure seems that way that when we think about that and then knowing about like rusty old cars, and I'll go ahead and put right here or talk about with the yellow right here, because I know people thinking too that what does yellow pretty much mean? Well, yellow is just another way of saying this to where caution, and also that if you see any labels like on any products and all that, usually you see a yellow made products and labels, but usually you would maybe see a yellow marking, like talk about for headlights right here. So let's just say that if we're talking about the headlights, and 102 that do you think that rusty old cars will be able to do this? Do you think rusty old cars would be able to do that. But on the other hand, it sure seems that way that, whenever it comes to understanding about rusty old cars, with a lot of rusty old cars, that like I say, yeah, they're going to have headlights on the front right here, but in a lot of ways, it's like, yeah, well, if it don't work, of course, it's not going to do the job. So it sure seems that way that, yeah, that, speaking of rusty old cars, though, that probably thinking too that, well, really, rusty old cars is another example of knowing that, the cars don't race. The cars are actually known as salvage cars, the type of cars that don't even have that ability to where they can go any faster than 50 mile an hour. Those are the type of cars that are known as to where, the junkyard type of salvaging vehicle. But still, that on the other hand, if we're talking about whenever it comes to rusty old cars, the sound of an engine going like, but the way I think about it too, though, that when we're talking about rusty old cars right here, and like say 102, the ones that sound like, but on the other hand, it's like, that with a lot of rusty old cars, that, like I say, is to where, you cannot race, or if anything, is to where, you can still race, but still, that you got a few scratches right here and a few scratches right there, to where that gives you have that ability to where you can't do certain things on a track. And but in a lot of ways, it sure seems that way. That what do we call if we talk about for the custom made paint job right here? But the way I think about it too, though, that whenever it comes to a custom made paint job, and like 102, that do rusty old cars really need any sorts of custom made paint job? And a lot of us will probably say too that, well, really, that if it's really required or recommended, though. But like you say that really, right, if a car were to sound like blah, 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 then more likely you would know for sure that I'm like, either a tune-up or any source of mechanical work or something like that. But let's just say that if we're talking about the type of a rusty old car here, that the type of rusty old car that sounds like blah, 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 blah. But say or if it sounds like but still that I know for the most part, though, that if we're talking about cars, though, that if we're talking about old clunkers, though, that the kind that sound like I talk about from Mater right here, that with Mater like I'm but anyway, but it sure seems that way, that when we speak about rusty old cars, what does the sound of a rusty old wrench sound like? And like if I say that, well, if it's a wrench, or if it's anything such as maybe tubulent filters or something like that, what does the sound of maybe an air pump, like something, oil pump or an air pump basically mean? What does the sound of an air pump sound like whenever it's jammed or something like that? Like say, does it sound like or something like that? So a lot of times they say that, what does it usually sound like when it's jammed? Yeah, when it's jammed, when it's jammed, what does it sound like when it's jammed? But anyway, but you have right here, or talk about right here of have right here is like the details right there of talk about for rusty old cars, and say with Mater right here, and let's just say that it could be other sorts of rusty old car, but it sure seems that way that when we're talking about a rusty old car too, that it sure seems that way that 102 is to where that really what's one thing about rusty old cars that maybe that they can or cannot do? And like say is to where number one, that they more likely they can't race. Like, yeah, they can train somebody on like on how to be able to speed. I'm like, yeah, drive, like, look behind them, and also yeah, tow the cars, give them a fresh tow and all, but still that. But it sure seems that way that whenever we're talking about for rusty old cars right here, that give the rusty old car a source of paint job right here, and that paint job is going to give it, that ability to word it, yeah, to make it look almost like brand new, or just knowing it as to where knowing about it as to where that the problem was able to get fixed right here. You just gotta go ahead and smooth out a few of the scratches and dents and all that, but still. But if we're talking about right here, talking about for rusty old cars, and rusty old tools right here, you're probably thinking too that, yeah, with those rusty old cars and rusty old tools, and like you want to know too that, yeah, what does it mean when we're talking about, for a rusty old car, between rusty old cars and rusty old tools? Well, those rusty old tools, like I say, is to want to know about how many of them still work, compared to the ones that don't even work anymore. So it sure seems that way that, yeah, that you talk about the ones that don't even work anymore. Now, come on now. Yeah, well, the bits or maybe the heads or anything like that are on, they're used, just to be able to tighten up the foundation of the mounting of the vehicle, and also the tires, keeping the tires in place or something like that. Talk about say value, but the way I think about too, though, that when we're talking about for a rusty old car right here, that people probably say too that, yeah, well, for a rusty old car that we're talking about, that with most of the time, for a rusty old car, it's just another way of stating as to word it, yeah, that cars that don't, that either that are not considered race cars, or the type of cars that don't even run very well compared to the race cars, and or compared to the tow truck. But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about salvage vehicles right here, and likely 102, that the type of salvage vehicle toward that the type of parts that are given toward that allowed toward that the car will be able to run with the ability to where they can go ahead and drive and race, and then also that will be able to haul things. So it sure seems that way that, yeah, that when we think about cars, though, that there's different kinds of cars and trucks and SUVs and all that, but at the time you weren't know too as to where if there's any particular name for the rusty old parts, or for the rusty old cars. And like I say, is to where if you want to kind of call it delighted, or if you want to kind of call it as to where it's another name of how you want to give to where the cars that that the ones that had the ability to where that they can go ahead and race, but then also the ones where they had the ability to where they can tell their stories about that they were race cars, and then they came up to bad luck, and then they once had that ability to where that they spent time in the local junkyard, and the ones that knows as to where that they learned a lot, from the salvage yard. It's like, say, the different parts that do different things. And when I say one of those things would also be is to where one of those things is also going to be about is to where that, how to use the tools, and then how to use the rear view mirrors. And it sure seems that way that we're talking about, for a lot of the rusty old cars right here, the ones that know how to turn, make a sharp left and make a sharp right whenever it comes to racing on the track, right? And I like thinking too that, especially the rusty old cars, that knowing about how to, how to drive, and then how to practice, their angle and all that, but it sure seems that way that when we think about a rusty old car, are we necessarily thinking about is that, yeah, the ones, the cars that don't run on a normal speed, the ones that are also considered, which it calls like to word it, talking about, the ones that are also known as like the salvage ones, the ones that are known as toward that type of cars, the rusty old cars that you can also refer to are the ones where you find a lot of the old classic parts, the auto parts, the ones they have a lot of smashed and dent curves and all that inside on the paint. And so it sure seems that way that when we speak about rusty old cars also is that that the ones that are not considered too ugly, but then on your hand too that just a few scratches on the paint, a few knowing about the ones with still working headlights and all that, and the ones that have their jobs for what they do. But it sure seems that way that when we talk about rusty old cars right here, that with a lot of the rusty old cars, I say too, is toward the type of job for what keeps a racetrack, drive on the track. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day.